I've learned as I have been on my own metabolic health journey and reset and working with people over the last year or so is we don't really understand what's happening with fat loss. We get so much advice, so many opinions, and as new information is brought forth from research and studies, one of the things that happens is within the medical community, it seems like new information is not, of course, readily brought to us because it kind of may impact an old paradigm. Now, as the wellness preacher, you got to realize that, I can look at a lot of things. And when I look at Jesus breaks old paradigms all the time when it comes to teaching people and helping people see the broader things about God and understanding. Well, the reality is science does the very same thing. If we still went by what science used to say, we would still be looking at, the universe revolves around the earth. I mean, there are so many different things. We would never have learned that washing hands was one of the most important things we could do when it came to overall health and dealing with germ theory and germ related diseases, right? Bacteria and viruses and infections. So it is so very important that we realize that when it comes to fat loss and fat storage, there's been a lot of things that have been learned that have been brought to light. And today we want to hear from Lindsay Venn, and I'm always excited to hear from Lindsay and learn from her. So I invite you to pull out a pen and paper because this is going to be a lot of great information if weight loss is one of the things that you've been dealing with or somebody who you love has been dealing with.
Thank you, Brittany, for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen. As you all know, I like PowerPoint slides, and they make teaching so much easier and getting the point across to everybody. So give me just a second while this comes across. So perfect. So like Brittany said, I do work with Insulin IQ. That is one of my largest gigs. I also have my own medical practice, which is integrative medicine. You're welcome to find me at either of these locations if you want some personalized help. But like she said, I'm going to speak specifically to insulin resistance and fat storage versus fat burning, which is really what we want to do. When we talk about weight loss, which is a major topic, just like Lisa had said, we don't necessarily want to just lose weight. We want to lose fat. And that's the topic I really want to highlight today. And like I said, weight seems to be the focus, but we really want to talk about fat and how that is distributed on people and how insulin and insulin resistance play a major role in this. These two gentlemen are probably about the same weight, but they have very different body types and different lean body mass composition. And that is the focus of how do we improve this over time with our diet, with different protocols like the Feel Great system, and improving insulin resistance, which we know is a major contributor to all chronic disease. Thank you, Lisa, for pointing it out. Prediabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, you name it, they all come from the same root cause, which is insulin resistance. So first, you guys know me, I like to educate on a lot of different things. First of all, let's talk about fat. There's lots of different kinds of fat and how it is distributed on the body. And I want to get into a little bit of this. I'm not going to get too sciencey on you, but it is an important topic. There's different kinds of fat because there are different kinds of health risks associated with the different kinds of fat. So gynoid fat storage, I have here at the top, that's this one. That is, I guess I can use my marker, huh? That is this poor lady up here who tends to store all of her fat in her butt and her hips. That's gynoid fat storage. So lower body pear shape is what we've always described it as, is one kind of fat storage. Subcutaneous fat storage is here. This is the stuff that you can grab, pinch, jiggle, all of those things. It's a different kind of fat storage, and honestly, a healthier kind of fat storage than the last one, which is our visceral fat storage. Visceral fat storage is this issue that insulin resistance plays the major role in, where we store fat inside of our viscera. Viscera is the inner lining of our abdominal cavity, and if we were to look at it from an imaging standpoint, I love this image for this. These two, I assume they're gentlemen, body types look very, very similar from the outside, but from the inside, they're extremely different. If you look at this picture right here, there's a ton of fat inside of the abdominal cavity or the viscera, like I had mentioned. This is the stuff that is going to kill you. This is the stuff that creates all of the chronic disease that we worry about: diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, fatty liver, PCOS, you name it. They all come from visceral fat storage. This person over here has subcutaneous fat storage. It's all on the outside of that abdominal cavity. Certainly not pretty. We don't like that from the pretty aspect, but we do like it from a health aspect. If you're going to store fat, we want to do it that way. But how do you know? How do you determine how your body stores fat and how do you fix it so you can lose it, number one, but two, make sure that it's not going into the visceral cavity, which is so detrimental to our health. So first, there's two kinds of ways to grow fat. And a lot of people don't know this, but hyperplasia and which is this one here, and hypertrophy are the two primary ways of storing fat. Hyperplasia means making more fat cells. So instead of growing bigger fat cells, which is hypertrophy, we're growing lots and lots and lots of tiny little fat cells. Hyperplasia is about 5% of the population. It's not a very big portion of us. This is the people who are the 600-pound life kind of people. They can grow lots and lots and lots of healthy little fat cells and get severely morbidly obese, but not experience chronic disease from it. Hypertrophy, which is the 95% of the rest of us, is the kind where we actually just have a limited amount of fat cells and these just continue to grow and grow and grow. But the problem with this hypertrophic or hypertrophy of fat cells is that these guys are very, very inflammatory and very detrimental to our health. And so because this is the majority of the population, this is the group that we focus on how do you fix this, how do you prevent this, and how do you reverse this, and the strategies associated with it. The other piece of this is, well, what kind of fat do we have? There's a couple of different kinds of fat. So white fat is the primary fat that we have for fat storage. This is just literally storing fat. This is storing energy for later use, which our body was designed to do. We also have this lovely thing called brown fat. Brown fat is something that is inversely or oppositely related to insulin resistance. The more insulin resistance you have, the less brown fat you will have. Well, brown fat is really good for burning energy. As you can see, it's an energy burning kind of fat. And we want to be able to optimize our brown fat while limiting the amount of white fat that we have in the body. And that's part of the topic of conversation today. This is just another image that talks about there's an intermediary form of fat that's in there. So what are we looking at? We're looking at storing versus burning. We want to be brown fat associated. We want to be burning versus storing. We want to be generating heat, which is actually just creating excess calories that we're burning for no good reason. We want to be able to improve our mitochondrial function, which brown fat does. And how do you fix this? You do this with your diet. You can do it with things like cold exposure or hermetic stress, and you can do it with exercise. And so all of these little topics here will play a role, but our primary focus today is how do we do this with our diet and primarily with the Feel Great system. So where does insulin play a role in this? Because insulin is the culprit when it comes down to what do we do with our fat. So for those of you who have not been on this call before, I do talk a lot about insulin and what does insulin do and why is it important. And so I like to revisit this every time that I come and meet with people here on this topic. Insulin is the hormone that is excreted when we eat. Every time we eat, we're going to have more insulin. Insulin here will enter into this receptor. This receptor triggers this effect, this cascading effect that allows glucose into the cell. Well, this is for someone who is insulin sensitive. Their cells are sensitive to the effects of insulin and it functions the way it's supposed to. People who are insulin resistant, this part doesn't work. This cell, this receptor, is resistant to the effects of insulin, and therefore this cascading effect of getting glucose in doesn't work. Why is that a problem? Well, insulin, and I pointed out here, is just like a key in a lock. In order to get glucose, our main fuel source, into the cell, we have to have a key that gets into the lock, unlocks the cell wall, and lets glucose in. Well, with insulin resistance, this key and this lock no longer work, and we can't function the way that we're supposed to. So what happens? When we've been fed, so anytime when you've eaten something, we do a few things with that energy. First of all, we are going to, in our liver, we're going to process this glycogenolysis, which is a production of glycogen. Glycogen is our short-term storage form of energy, and I'm going to make this a lot simpler here in a second. We also have our muscle cells that have glycogen. This is our fight or flight response. If we were to be chased by a bear, our muscle glycogen is going to excrete all of this glucose, and we're going to have all this energy to run from the bear. And then lastly, we have these adipose cells. If we have our glycogen cells are full and our muscle cells are full, now all of this excess energy is going to go into fat storage, which those of us, like Lisa had mentioned, really don't want to do. We want to burn fat. We don't want to store fat. Insulin is the massive culprit here. When we have high levels of insulin, which occurs in insulin resistance, we are going to take that glucose and we are going to store it. We're not only going to store it in our fat, we're also going to start storing fat in our liver and our muscle, which leads to fatty liver and sarcopenia and other kinds of things. Also hypertriglyceridemia or elevated levels of triglyceride, because we have this elevated insulin level from the diet that we have all been taught to do, like Lisa said, eat 6 times a day to keep your metabolism up. Well, this all leads to more and more insulin, which we do not want to do because of this repercussion of increased fat storage. So let's make it easier. This is where I was talking about it. We're gonna make it easier. We have 2 fuel sources, and I stole this off of Dr. Jason Fung. If y'all haven't heard of him, he's amazing, and I absolutely love him when it comes to intermittent fasting. We have 2 fuel sources, just like we do in our kitchen. We can get our food or our energy from our refrigerator, or we can get our energy from our freezer. Well, when we're cooking, we all know how much easier it is to cook something from the refrigerator than it is to cook from our freezer. And so we want to make sure that we're figuring out how do we utilize the freezer in a much easier way, because this is also AKA our fat. Insulin is the thing that does this. So if we have high levels of insulin, So I'm going to use this little analogy. So we're going to eat some carbohydrates, our insulin is going to spike, and we're going to fill up that refrigerator as much as we can. Well, just like the refrigerator in your kitchen, there's only so much room. After that refrigerator is full, you have to put the rest of your food somewhere else. And so we stick it in the freezer. In the freezer, it just gets stored as fat for something we can use later, but is a little bit more difficult to use. The only exception here is by utilizing this GLUT4 mechanism, which I won't go into detail on, by using exercise. But using exercise, exercising after we eat can help utilize that, so we're not actually storing our glucose as fat in the long run. So I pulled this up today. I just thought, I'm going to make this a little bit more simple. So if you were to go say, okay, I want some energy, what am I going to use? Am I going to go pull out this frozen turkey from my freezer? Or am I going to go get the thing that's in the fridge that I've already cooked? Well, this one's the easy guy. And that's the one, if you continually feed yourself and continually have high levels of insulin, you're never going to tap into this freezer, because why would you do that? That's harder. So we want to get insulin levels down. So cooking from our freezer and utilizing the fuel source that's available in our freezer is easier to do. And I created this slide so many years ago, but I still love it, so I keep using it. What is the cause of all of this? We've all been taught calories in versus calories out. This is why we become obese. This is our current thoughts. But what if we had it all wrong? What if this hormonal model of obesity, also meaning the insulin model of obesity, is actually the correct way? And we know at Insulin IQ, and Dr. Ben teaches it all the time, that high levels of insulin from frequent feeding and high carbohydrate diets and lack of things like intermittent fasting, this high level of insulin will lead to an increased intake. It leads to increased food cravings, increased hunger, increased ability to store fat, and therefore will cause you to eat more, which will then lead to obesity. So we want to completely kibosh this idea where it's like, okay, it's not calories in versus calories out. And those of us who are eating less and moving more, we're just failing because we're not doing it well enough. It's really more about what are we prompting our insulin levels to do, and how do we control that to help that fat storage that leads to this obesity get better. So this slide just really says it. If your insulin is elevated, if you have high levels of insulin, you are going to store your excess calories as fat. You're going to crave more food. You're going to be hungrier all the time, and you're really going to have cravings for things like sugar and carbohydrates. If your insulin level is low, you're actually going to use the freezer or your fat stores for your fuel source. That's what it's designed for. Ancestrally, we have fat stores simply so we can use it in times of famine. So you'll burn your own body fat for fuel. You won't be hungry, and you won't crave these things, the carbohydrates and the sugar. And to me, this is an easy choice, is how do we utilize that freezer versus that refrigerator? As Brittany and Lisa both hinted at, most of us have this problem. Only 7% of our population right now is considered metabolically healthy, which AKA is normal or low levels of insulin. 93% of us struggle with this, and that's why this protocol is so important, because we can hit such a huge portion of the population and help them get better. So how do you do this? Well, we want to lower your insulin naturally, and we have several ways to do this, and a really great way to do this is the Feel Great system. The system, which Brittany's going to talk about in a lot more detail than I am, really incorporates a way to, one, lower glucose absorption with a fiber in the balance, and two, boost things like GLP-1 production and improve insulin sensitivity and reduce insulin resistance with the Unimate. The other part of this that I'm going to hint at Insulin IQ here is to follow an insulin smart diet. If you can follow a diet in addition to following the Feel Great system, you're going to find additional benefit. So reducing those refined processed carbohydrates, reducing the frequency of eating is extremely important when it comes to improving insulin sensitivity and helping you to burn fat. So what are some other things I would suggest? Number one, get some other metrics. How do you know if you are that gynoid fat store or that visceral fat store? How do you know? One, get your waist circumference. Waist circumference is a big part. If your waist circumference is greater than your hip circumference, you're in big trouble. We want to have that be at varying levels. It's at 0.8 for women and 0.7 for men. So measure your waist circumference. Get some blood levels, and you can certainly use us at Insulin IQ to help get this done. We can order these for you, but get an insulin level. Your doctor's not going to order it. You have to request it, and if they won't do it for you, there are cash pay options where I was looking today, they're between $6 and $8 if we order them cash pay. Get your insulin level and find out if you truly have high levels of insulin. We can calculate this with your basic cholesterol panel. Take your triglyceride, divide it by your HDL. If you're greater than 1.8, you have insulin resistance. And then last, look at your glucose and your A1C. If you're borderline high and your doctor's calling you pre-diabetic, you definitely have insulin resistance. Do this. I hate to say it. I hate pictures of myself, but take a selfie. Look at yourself, watch over time. If you are watching that midsection decrease as you're incorporating the protocol, that's a good sign. The bioelectric impedance scales The Renfo is the one that I have listed here. You can get these at Walmart for $25. They're very cheap, but they will give you a visceral fat measurement. And if you have a high level of visceral fat greater than a 10, you need to work on this because that insulin resistance is definitely contributing to what's going on. There are several gyms out there that will have an in-body scale that you can utilize. That's very helpful. You can also order a very expensive, I shouldn't say very expensive, but they're like $250. You can get one at home. Or the DEXA body composition measurement. This is by far the most accurate way to do it. You can Google these online. They're like $75 to get one on your own cash pay to determine the exact amount of visceral fat. And I really recommend for those just starting, for example, like Lisa, if you can get a pre and a post and watch that visceral fat decrease by a significant amount, you're going to watch all of those markers, the blood pressure, the blood glucose, the cholesterol, all those things get much, much better. But here what we're talking about too is what if we're stuck? For these people who are on the protocol or who have tried other things and it just seems to not be working, what can you do? Number one, follow this protocol as directed. We have many of you out here in this group and many that are maybe not in this group who they think they're following it or they're following it at 50%. Make sure you're following it as directed because like Brittany said, if you do it correctly, it will work. It may not be perfect at the beginning, but it will get better. Reduce or eliminate processed carbs and different processed foods, particularly seed oils and refined carbohydrates. Are you truly doing the fasting part? Do you know, is that creamer in your coffee in the morning breaking your fast? Or is that collagen powder you're putting in your coffee breaking your fast? Make sure that you are truly fasting. And then make sure you're doing some exercise. And this simple little strategy right here, going for a 5 to 10 minute walk after you eat will make a huge difference. And it's quite simple. If you're not currently exercising, add in 5 minutes, go up and down your stairs for 5 minutes after your dinner, and you'll notice a benefit when it comes to your insulin resistance and your body fat. So what if you're still stuck? And this happens. It does happen, especially in older women. Brittany's not that much as far as older. I am. But what if you're still stuck? What if you're still having problems? Well, that's when we look at changing it up. You know, maybe you're fasting through breakfast and eating lunch and dinner. Well, maybe we want you to fast then through dinner and eat breakfast and lunch. Try changing it up. Maybe skip lunch. There's a lot of options. Maybe consider a longer fast. Make sure to do it with the supervision of your doctor or a medical provider who's well versed in this, because longer fasts can honestly break that terrible cycle that we create where we just can't get through this plateau phase. So maybe a longer fast intermittently is a good idea, but do it with supervision. Look at your thyroid, look at your vitamin D, maybe check your hormones. If you're menopausal, that's a good thing to look at. And then two big ones that we really talk about a lot at Insulin IQ is your stress and your sleep. Two major drivers of insulin resistance above and beyond the diet would be high levels of stress or really poor sleep. Things like a sleep study can be very beneficial here as well. This little slide I brought in this is from my website, is trying to just demonstrate how much is encompassed in your health. You know, if you're here in the middle, what all do you have to look at? You do have to look at your metabolic health and your insulin levels. This is the easiest lever to pull. Maybe then we have to start focusing on other things such as stress and our gut health and fitness and whatnot. But it all is very encompassing. You want to make sure you're taking all these things into consideration when you're looking at why maybe the body fat composition changes aren't happening like you would expect. Other things that we recommend, prioritize your protein. We recommend 1 gram of protein per pound of desired body weight. So if you're 180 pounds and you want 50 pounds, get 150 grams of protein in a day if you can. Make sure you're doing some resistance exercise. Maybe reduce that intake if you're actually not feeling a lot of hunger pangs. And maybe try some time restricted eating instead of intermittent fasting. Like I said, change it up, change that fasting window a little bit in order to incorporate different levels of fasting to help with what the Feel Great system can do for you. And then last, this is probably the hardest part of my job, be patient. There is a time factor in this. If you've been metabolically sick for a very long time, it might take a very long time for that to improve. It depends on where you're at. We always say start with where you're at. If you're just brand new starting to something like this, you're probably going to get really good results really quickly. If you've been trying a ton of different things, it might take a little bit longer. Try something different. Maybe try a little bit harder. It's a hard message that I have to send to my patients sometimes. But this one is the one I really like to bring forward here is your mindset. If you are always telling yourself, this isn't for me and this isn't going to work for me and I'm that person is not going to work for and all of those things, stop that. You know, fix your mindset. Make sure that you're saying, you know what, I can do this differently or I can try something new or maybe I'm not doing the best that I can do. Work on that mindset. And then lastly, evaluate some things like your prescription medications because things like statin medications are going to negatively impact your insulin resistance and can be the barrier to the progress that you're going to see with something like the Feel Great system. So lastly, again, one more plug for me, Insulin IQ and Integrated
was great information for you if you weren't familiar with insulin resistance, particularly as it relates to fat storage. I hope that hearing from Lindsay was a huge help for you. If you would like for more information about Healthy Together and Feeling Great or Lindsay Venn, you can reach out to me. My QR code is here and here. Either one will work just fine. You'll be able to get to my link tree and contact us. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, make sure you do that. Have a great day. Go make it golden. And we'll see you back around on the flip side.